We start in Nashville, Tennessee. Again, a team where you say they were really 6-11. Yes, they were. They were 6-11 last year. They have a new head coach, Brian Callahan. He's the former offensive coordinator of the Bengals. New offensive coordinator, Nick Holtz, or Holtz, not exactly sure how you say it. Callahan will call the plays. It is derived from the Cincinnati system. So Nick looks to be just the pretty little guy that Brian's going to have next to him. Yep, just going to sit there. Will Levis, quarterback 1. There is no Ryan Tannehill to take it from him, even if that wouldn't happen anyway. But Will Levis, currently being drafted as quarterback 24. This is the underdog ADP as of today, June 5th. Tony Pollard is the RB1A, and Tyjae Spears is the RB1B, according to Josh, who input this depth chart here. But they are very close in ADP, 29 and 34 respectively, Pollard getting that 29 spot. Talk about 1A, 1B again. Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, 36 and 42 respectively for them. Steep drop to Tyler Boyd at wide receiver 86. And the quote, he needs to be a weapon on special teams or he won't see the field, Treylon Burks, wide receiver 4. That is a direct quote from Brian Callahan. Wide receiver 106. That is lower than every New York Giants receiver we talked about last week. That's how rough it is for Treylon Burks today. And Chigozimo Okonkwo, tight end 25. We got 3 players we want to highlight and talk about. We'll start in the backfield because we have highlighted both of these running backs, and I would like to know both sides here. Now, they're being drafted as flex guys in traditional fantasy football leagues. 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and a flex position in your traditional leagues. So, technically free, right? Technically free when you're looking at these guys here. Moody, I'll have you start with Tyjae Spears. A lot of hype around him last year coming in as this could be Henry's last year, and it ended up being. So there's a lot of like, ooh, this could be a good time for Tyjae Spears, but then Tony Pollard comes in and maybe ruins a little bit of that hype. Do you like Spears? Do you not like that Pollard's there? What's your vibe on him right now in the early June?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about Spears right now. What I found in the drafts that I've participated in is that typically Pollard is going first, and then Spears is available. And if you look at projections, we use Mike Clay's projections at ESPN. I'm like, they're projected for an eerily similar number of touches. And it's different going into this season where you're not competing with Derrick Henry and you're competing with Tony Pollard, who's coming off of an off season in Dallas. And you look at Spears last year, he had the 9th most targets among running backs, more than 800 total yards, a really impressive rookie season. And he really acted as a safety valve for Will Levis last year. And I think that's very encouraging going into 2024. So a lot of targets, a lot of touches available there. I do like Spears as like a mid-range RB2 and flex option, but I think it's upside for much more. So if you were to ask me, hey, Moody, who do you prefer, Spears or Pollard? I'm going to go with Spears due to the more upside, I would say.
Josh, I'll flip it to you on the Pollard side. I know you were not a fan of Pollard last year. You and I were on that train of we do not like Tony Pollard. Is it flipped because his ADP is no longer inside of the top 10? Or are you still like RB29 is still really why are we even drafting him here? He should be lower. Spears should be ahead.
No, I definitely think Pollard's more of a value this year than last year. I mean, RB29, you're telling me that I can get a starting running back at as my RB3? Like, yeah. I will take that any day of the week. I understand the concerns. I mean, he had a heavier workload last year, kind of tailed off a little bit. Obviously didn't start strong, but we all know he was coming off of the injury, the devastating ankle injury. Well, and I think that's really where you want to look at this, right? The second half of the season, the final 8 games of the year, he was on pace for over a full season, 233 fantasy points. And that would have put him at RB11. Guess who had 233 fantasy points last year? James Cook. So if you're telling me James Cook is worth the RB13 spot this year, why are we taking Tony Pollard almost 17 spots after him in RB rankings? They're basically the same guy. Now, I understand you have very different offenses. You have Josh Allen at quarterback. You have Will Levis at quarterback. They are very different. You have competition with Tyjae Spears. But Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard are essentially the same running back. There's not a difference when you really look at what their skill sets are. yes, I do think that his ADP is kind of baked into that like competition where there's a good chance that the offense might be, running the hot hand. So there might be some games where Tony Pollard has 6 or 7 touches, and then some games where he might have 23 touches. But we've also seen that exact same thing with James Cook when Josh Allen goes through and runs for 3 rushing touchdowns. So to me, there's not that much of a difference to justify that big of a swing in ADP.
Yeah. No,
29 to 34 from those two. I mean, to me, they're both values. When you
I was just going to say
offense,
yes.
When you look at this offense and what we ultimately want to project them to be is kind of like a Cincinnati Bengals light. I'm all for it. I think both these guys are going to see 50 plus targets. I currently have Tony Pollard at about 61, so a little bit more than Tyjae Spears, and I have him at just over 200 carries. But this is going to be a two-headed monster. It's going to be Pollard and it's going to be Spears. There's not going to be anything really left over for anybody else outside of Will Levis.
The only thing I was going to throw in with Scott Fishbowl scoring dropping today, Josh and I were just talking about this. Tyjae Spears returned kicks last year, and with these new kickoff return rules, if you play in a league where there is value, and there could be immense value if you were one of the lucky people who are in Scott Fishbowl, Tyjae Spears could actually do a lot of really nice work with these new kickoff rules.
That's going to be Treylon Burks. I don't know if you heard in the intro to the Tennessee Titans. That's going to be Treylon Burks.
Well, no, they meant tackling on kick returns.
Oh, tackling on. Oh, yeah.
He was a gunner. Yeah, he was a gunner, Joe.
I mean,
my bad. Sorry.
He fought. What was it? Wild boars. I think.
Yeah. He caught hogs.
Yeah.
He can't catch footballs, but he caught hogs.
There you go. But no. So I Josh and Moody both hit the point that I was looking to make sure got said there was these guys are very similar, which makes them interchangeable. And so I don't know if one's going to have a heavy workload, but at their current ADP, you don't need them to have a heavy workload.
Exactly. I think that's the big thing. It's like just pick up whoever's available. Like we've been doing a lot of mock drafts, 100%. As I mentioned before the show, at ESPN Fantasy. And I think about the most recent mock draft that we had. I was able to land like Tyjae Spears in like round 8 or round 9.
Perfect.
You got to pull the trigger on
100%.
Pollard or Spears at that stage of the draft. It's a no-brainer.
I think it's also a look in the mirror because what we were saying going into last year is that Tony Pollard's never been the main guy, and he's better in a split backfield because he's more efficient with less touches. So why are we now going back on that when he's in a split backfield? He should be more efficient.
Exactly.
I
think
the
biggest thing, and I do want to give a shout out to one of our writers, Chris Molina, who just dropped on Monday his article about Tyjae Spears. And one of the biggest points was red zone usage, right? Tony Pollard was not very good in the red zone last year as the lead dog. Now, granted, he's the quote lead dog this year, ideally, but he's also in a split backfield. The biggest difference to me here is that they don't have that bigger back in theory that's going to come in and steal and lead the way in these red zone opportunities. You can lose me on the Hassan Haskins
dog
setup there, right? Yeah. But they bring in Bill Callahan from Cincinnati, who's arguably one of the best offensive line coaches, not just in the NFL today, but in NFL history. Joe Mixon has 29 rushing touchdowns over the last 3 years combined. So you're telling me that, 220 pounds of Joe Mixon, makes it a little easier to run inside the red zone. But we could be seeing a system that just generates red zone touchdowns. So I'm not fully discounting Tony Pollard's ability to score in the red zone. He did have 5 red zone touchdowns in 2022 with Zeke as sort of the lead guy in the red zone. He had only 3 last year, or maybe that's flipped. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're going to see opportunities. And you also have a bigger quarterback in Will Levis as well. That wouldn't surprise me if he steals a few of those red zone touchdowns as well.
That's what I was thinking as well. He could easily have 2 or 3. But then you got a guy like Pollard for where it's not out of the realm of possibility that he finishes the season with 6 or 7 rushing touchdowns. So I like it.
But even then, that can still very well end up as a low-end RB1 in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
So
over to the receivers. Ryan, you highlighted D-Hop.
Yeah.
Second, I guess not second year in a system, but second year with this quarterback.
Yep.
The only receiver in the second year with this quarterback that matters currently on this roster. Is that why you like him at 42?
Yeah. it's easy to point at DeAndre Hopkins at 32 years old and say he's going to get worse because he's getting older. And that's not necessarily untrue. But the ADP is again making him a value that far down. He is one of the few players that played very well with Will Levis last year. DeAndre Hopkins had that 3-touchdown game, but he also scored 4 touchdowns in the final 8 games, not even counting that 3-touchdown game. So DeAndre Hopkins can work with this. And obviously there's competition now with Calvin Ridley. When I was setting things up for my projections, one of the things that caught me really off guard, DeAndre Hopkins and Calvin Ridley, yards per catch rate, very similar players. So very similar to the running backs. They're dealing with 2 of the same kind of guy out there where it's just kind of chuck and hope it's down there. And obviously Calvin Ridley is younger than DeAndre Hopkins, but Calvin Ridley was also an old rookie. So he's not that much younger than DeAndre Hopkins. But with Will Levis's style of play, DeAndre Hopkins, specifically in best ball, is a perfect target. You have the ceiling of these 3-touchdown games. It's not going to happen often, but it's going to happen enough to make him a value down there in the 40s at wide receiver. He didn't take a big enough step back last year and what should have been a worse offense than what we're going to see this year.
Yeah.
It's not, yes, they lost Derrick Henry, but what they gained in Brian Callahan and Will Levis getting a second year of experience, I think there's a lot of room for this offense to be very good. And we've seen this scheme produce multiple good wide receivers. Now, Will Levis, not Joe Burrow. I don't think I need to explain that to anybody. But the scheme itself does lend itself to having 2 good wide receivers.
Yeah. So we're going to play our first Would You Rather. Moody's very familiar with it, but if you've never heard of it before, it was a thing invented on this show. We choose a player, and then we say, would you have this player or the other player? Never been done before. Invented it like 3-4 years ago on this show. They're so close in ADP, 36 and 42. So I'm going to split it because I do think there are some discrepancies. Like there are some guys higher that you probably wouldn't take D-Hop over. But Ridley's at 36. We're going to go 34 down to 38. I don't need an explanation. Let's just hear it. Moody, starting with you. Would you rather Jaden Reed or Calvin Ridley? Let's assume this is PPR redraft.
We're going Ridley or Hop here?
Ridley or Jaden Reed?
Okay.
Yes. So, Moody.
You know what? I would rather have Jaden Reed.
Ryan?
I'd rather have Jaden Reed than more than half of the guys going in the top 20. I'm a big Jaden Reed guy this year.
Yes.
Josh?
I'm going to say Jaden Reed, but it does scare me with just how much Green Bay spreads the football around, and a healthy Christian Watson is going to really impact Jaden Reed. So I'll say Jaden Reed.
So that one was the layup. In my opinion, that one was the layup. That one's pretty easy, Jaden Reed. Xavier Worthy or Calvin Ridley? Moody.
I'm going to go Calvin Ridley.
Ryan.
I'll take Patrick Mahomes as wide receiver. You know I will. Xavier
Obviously. Josh?
I will take Calvin Ridley as well.
I think most people would go with the veteran status there that aren't Chiefs diehards or Ryan Weisse. So I'd agree with that. Now you get into 2 vets. This is an interesting one. Calvin Ridley or Chris Godwin? Moody?
I'm still going to go with Calvin Ridley here.
Ryan?
Yeah.
Chris Godwin.
Of course you are. Josh?
I do have Ridley higher in my rankings. Not by much, but I'll stick with Ridley.
Okay, and last one. Ridley or Jordan Addison? Moody?
God, I'm going to have to go with Ridley here. It's tough, but Ridley.
Okay, Ryan?
You got me, Calvin Ridley.
Okay, Josh?
It's Calvin Ridley.
Okay, so Ridley's pretty much where he should be, is kind of what it looks like. He's pretty much where he should be. Now we'll go to D-Hop because he's sandwiched in between a lot of rookies, which is interesting. So this is why would you rather take the veteran? Would you take him at 39? Roma Dunze or DeAndre Hopkins? Roma Dunze we'll talk about later. Moody?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Hop here.
Ryan?
DeAndre Hopkins.
Josh?
DeAndre Hopkins.
Okay. Lad McConkey or DeAndre Hopkins? Moody?
Got to go with Hopkins.
Ryan?
DeAndre Hopkins.
Josh?
D-Hop.
Keon Coleman or DeAndre Hopkins? Moody? This one's going to be Ryan's little devil because I know he's going to say Keon Coleman.
Sorry, that was good. Got to go with Hop. Hop.
Ryan.
I'm going around early and I'm taking both.
Give me Give Ryan the Macy's coat. He's going.
Wow.
They're both on the board. It's Keon Coleman every time, twice on Sundays.
Oh my goodness.
3 times.
Listen,
at Macy's.
I want Keon Coleman on my team just so I have Keon Coleman on my team.
100%. That's where my life is. Right. Marlia has fallen in love with Keon Coleman. If I don't walk out of every draft with Keon Coleman, my wife might leave me at this point.
Wow.
So Ryan's normal answer is DeAndre Hopkins. Josh.
D-Hop.
Okay. D-Hop's 42. Now we'll go 43 and 44. Brian Thomas Jr. or DeAndre Hopkins?
First of all, my goodness, it's DeAndre Hopkins in every rookie.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. He's being drafted really low right now. And then it goes Jackson Smith and Jigba, which could have a conversation there. You could have a conversation there. Deontay Johnson, you can definitely have a
I
conversation
say that's
there.
the first conversation is Deontay
Yeah.
Johnson.
Yeah.
Christian
I would
Watson.
take JSN over D-Hop, too.
I would say
What?
that's. I think it's closer than you think.
Yep.
Deontay's a definite conversation. Christian Watson's a conversation if you want to go injury. But then it's Rashee Rice, Jamison Williams, Cortland Sutton maybe might be the next guy.
Rashee Rice has fallen that far. Wow.
Yeah, 47. Yeah. So, again, DeAndre Hopkins is, where he's going, a steal.
Yeah.
That's what I want to bring this up. He has 3 rookies directly ahead of him, then Brian Thomas Jr. flanking his backside.
It'll be interesting to see when we kind of get out of this post-dynasty rookie fever.
What
and
happens?
Get into the throes of the summer when DeAndre Hopkins has the name recognition, certainly over Brian Thomas and Ladd McConkey. These aren't guys that the average NFL fan is going to jump in and be like, I need to get Ladd McConkey. So it's going to be interesting to see if these guys all move up together, fall down together, where DeAndre Hopkins ends up when we get into more redraft-focused drafting later on in the summer.
Go ahead, Moody.
Something I would add to that. I'm like, you brought up a really good point for those that are watching or listening, is that essentially what you're getting with DeAndre Hopkins is that he's got wide receiver 3 pricing, but he's a solid wide receiver 2. And one thing that kind of struck out to me when you were naming some of these other players is that when you look at Hopkins, I'm like, that's a guy that can easily get 125 or more targets. With some of those rookies and those other players, I'm like, that's not the case with some of those other players. So.
Yeah. Roma Dunze should not approach 90 targets this season. Like, it's crazy to have them in the same conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. We will go through some bets here, and then we'll get to a couple questions in the chat. So top 3 favorites. Ryan, you have Will Levis over 3,450 and a half passing yards. It's minus 115. Again, player props nowadays, folks, not the abundance that it will be.
No, it's actually getting way better.
Getting better?
And we pulled all of our bets from Eric's ESPN bet, and every quarterback is represented at this point, and we're starting to see a lot more of every other. Like I told you guys, as the summer moves on, these bets are going to get way more interesting. I found one for our last team that I was super thrilled to find. So there's some cool bets now. So,
boom. Josh, you have the Titans to be a wild card team at plus 1,100. Does he believe it? No. Is it really good odds in a shitty, really good odds in a shitty division outside of Jacksonville? Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. And then Moody, you have the Titans over 6.5 wins. They just need one more. They just need one more than last year. Yeah. And by all accounts, they're a whole heck of a lot better than last year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's plus money too.
Especially
That's plus
defense.
115.
We've been talking about their offense. We don't do a ton of focus on defense. That team improved greatly on the defensive side of the ball. And you brought up that division, Joe. Obviously, everybody loves CJ Stroud, but that Houston team still has a lot of growing to do. That's a more wide open division than we'd like to think it is.
Yeah, I think Tennessee, if you look at it, is at the bottom right now, but they're not at the bottom by 4 less wins. Yeah. Like 1 less win, maybe. And yes, that defense still anchored by the dog, Jeffrey Simmons, in the middle. Yep. So, that man. Arguably the best defensive tackle in the league now that Aaron Donald is no longer gracing us with his presence in the NFL.